Pharmaceutical Processing, in conjunction with INTERPHEX 2017, presents INTERPHEX Live.
All right. Good afternoon, New York. Okay, we finally got this straightened out. So it'll be seamless, don't worry. So, as promised this morning on the serialization, we're going to continue on because we realize that the deadline is creeping up. A lot of people have either a plan or remain clueless, so hopefully we'll fill in the gaps. And to do that, we have with us today, we have Mark Hefford from Tracelink. We got Ashley Umberger, correct?
Yes, sir.
And that's from Afton Scientific. And we got Mark Wessel from Pfizer, and he is the global serialization. Was one of the things we brought up this morning was on the globalized aspect, and unfortunately we kind of focused on the domestic aspects of it. So hopefully we're going to fill that gap in this afternoon. So, having said all of that, when I ask the question, we'll start from the end down. So Mark.
Yep.
So where are we at? What's the involvement? I mean, what is the scope of the serialization and the rollout? What's your assessment of our preparedness as an industry?
As an industry, I think we're still a little slow for full adoption. Definitely seeing that the CMO business has kind of stalled and pushed out. I think a lot of folks are trying to see if something in the happens with the Fed, whether they'll move it out. I've even heard folks saying, they're waiting for Mr. Trump to do something. So, I mean, there's all kinds of reasons why. I would say excuses, but I think there's reasons why. But yeah, it's definitely slowed down a little bit, but I think the folks are diligently looking at it, I would say.
So obviously one of the things that people are talking about is the expense, and what we're trying to do is give our audience an idea of enablement and expense. So Mark, I mean, when we're looking at enabling serialization, that's relatively an expensive proposition, or what do we have to do to minimize the impact on our business case?
Yeah, so one of the things that we look at and what people should take into consideration is that it's a huge expense to your business. So you don't want to go in with a one-off solution. In other words, if you're just producing for one market, you try not to tailor your solution for that one market. Think global when you do that, because everybody eventually is going to head this way, and if you can if you can put yourself into a situation where it's a minor adjustment to your packaging lines, from a long term it's much more cost effective. So we try to stay away from a unique solution like China. Instead, we went with a global GS1 standard, and then we apply that to everything that we do, and it does create a little bit of tweaks on the line, but at the end of the day we still maintain the same core set of solutions, and for us it becomes a lot more cost effective.
So, I mean, pretty much that's the approach. Can you expand on that a little more?
So one of the things that we do, to keep the expense down for Pfizer, and this is definitely applicable for others, is that we look at combinations of moving products onto fewer lines. We try to then take a look and make sure that line is outfitted so that it can handle a broad spectrum. So for example, in the EU, they look at authentication. So it's all about unit serialization. But if you look in the US, it's going to be aggregation and eventually full aggregation. If you're working in China, it's full aggregation to the pallet level. If you're looking at Brazil, another one that will go to the pallet level. So what we did was we designed for the full end-to-end, full serialization all the way to the pallet, and then we adjust backwards using a modular type approach, so that when we do approach one of our facilities, we take a look at it from a business perspective and then put the right modules in place that meets their needs, but it's a building block so that when they go to other markets, it's just another module that we add on.
So Ashley, I mean, obviously what I'd like to get from you is what are the challenges you encounter? Obviously you deal with clients of all different sizes, so maybe we share that so we get a sense of what that is.
Sure. So I definitely agree with Mark as far as saying there's no unique or elaborate situation where you need something to be a little bit more flexible. So I know when we had different packages that may vary in physical dimension, whether it be a carton or a case, something along those lines, we needed something that was able to adapt to fit those different things. So challenges trying to find a system that you actually could fit different types of packages on from a physical standpoint. Also, there was different printing dimensions, so that was something that we needed to work to make sure that we could fit all the required information that was needed for serialization, GS1 requirements. I'd say the serialization part was pretty straightforward, but I know from an experience trying to get our line started that the aggregation portion was a little bit more challenging, just trying to make sure that the software itself could either accept serial numbers or self-generate serial numbers, and obviously meet the formats and the different requirements that are needed at different packaging tiers.
So flexibility from a CMO standpoint is paramount?
I would say that flexibility is definitely going to allow CMOs to keep their business models the way that they are, meaning they can still work and do different types of products, but still be able to make sure that all your clients get the requirements that they need, any type of specifics, whether it be the G10 number or the number of digits in your serial number, things like that. Everybody has a different preference.
So, Mark, I mean, from your standpoint,
Can I just jump in real quick? So, what everybody that we've noticed, I work typically with all CMOs across North America. So we're working with about 130 different organizations, of which about half have made a decision. Most of those folks are very, very comfortable with what they've known their whole life, which is the line. And that's the levels 1 through 3. Where folks are having a more difficult time understanding the process is the levels 4 and 5, which would be your EPCIS repository, and whether there's a need for that, and or in your level 5, which is the network, being able to reach out to all the individual organizations that you're actually working with on a daily basis. So that's the part where we see folks kind of holding back and pulling off. Just to elaborate, it's completely understandable on the CMO side that they're comfortable with what they've known their whole lives. And the IT organizations, for some of these, even these smaller organizations, they're 1 or 2 people, and you're talking about changing an infrastructure for these folks, and it's scary and it's daunting.
Yeah, and to add on to that too, the other thing that from a CMO perspective that's important for us is having that flexibility, right? So to your point on the IT systems, putting the data onto the package is a challenge. Aggregation, as Ashley mentioned, is even a bigger challenge. But then collecting that data, making sure it's accurate, and then providing that to whoever you're packaging for is yet a whole new realm in the level 4 area, as Mark was mentioning. So it's very critical that you look at the whole end-to-end solution. So it's not just about putting something onto a package, but it's also about data traveling along with that package and making sure that we can do the necessary reporting at whatever government that we're providing that pack for.
All right, I'm going to ask the next question, and one of the things we've always found is deployment, and deployment requires a team. And we've had about 3 sessions where everybody says, that the specific aspect, and it's amazing how many different people suggest the types of individuals to get a project done. Having said that, on serialization, I'm at a point where who do I put on a team? So we're going to ask, that's important for us to understand as a supplier, a user, and you follow where I'm going. So in other words, if you're going to so what sort of a team do you put together? Say, I got to do this, and I got to do it before November. So who are the key players that you pull in?
So 2 aspects to that. So there's about how do we put the infrastructure and the process in place for us to deploy, and then there's the actual people that are doing the work at our particular facilities. Both of those are 2 separate teams, so I'll address the first one, which is what kind of infrastructure do you need at a program level to ensure that what you're designing is adequate to meet all the global requirements. Again, I stress global. It's not all about the US. US is a big piece, but we have the EU coming right behind it, which is a significant amount of SKUs for a lot of companies. And then you have all of the other small little countries that are out there that are just as important, but have their own uniqueness. So you have to be able to make sure that you design for that. So from our perspective, when we look at a team, we look at a full end-to-end team. So you need folks up front that understand technically what are you trying to do with that package, and for all those massive configurations, how do we make it as affordable as possible for our company? Then the second thing is you got to look at the infrastructure and the IT piece. How do you build out an infrastructure that can handle all of this uniqueness, yet provide you accurate data and get it into the reporting formats that you need to, because every country requires a different aspect to what they want you to report on. So how do you go about designing that? So you need somebody from IT. Partnerships are extremely strong. You really need to make sure that the serialization provider is not just a provider, he's a team member. And it's like family. You got to make sure that you gel with that particular company, because you got to understand where they headed in life, and you're getting ready to sign on, and all your products are going to be based on their infrastructure and that it will sustain what you need. Then look internally. We touch external supply, which handles all of our contract manufacturing. We have internal sites that we have to work out for. We have logistics and supply. It's not about just putting the product labeling on, but how do you get the product through the supply chain? How does the data go with it? So those are all key members to the team. And before I stop, the most important one out of all of them for a foundational block is your regulatory compliance people need to be on board with you on understanding what the requirements are globally, monitoring those requirements, and understanding clarification around what does it actually mean to us. And then we take that and move that into understanding what does that look like in a design, and then going forward for that.
So Ashley, same question to you. What would your team look like?
I'd say that some of the challenges that we would probably experience may not be as global as Mark has been talking about, but I do know trying to implement something like this at a smaller company, it was definitely it's a good collaboration of pretty much every department that we have. As you said, you need your regulatory, quality assurance people to be involved. You absolutely need your engineers, but you also need your production people to understand how to run the equipment. It's all dandy when you finally actually have the software and whatever equipment you have, but obviously your production people and getting that to work is obviously super important. So I'd say it's definitely a very cross-functional internal organization where you definitely need to have your training, have your engineers do the training. In our case, that's typically how we do it as we're validating and working through everything. Then making sure with your quality people that you have the requirements that you need, that you're meeting the GS1 standards, and then also making sure that you're working with the client whose product that is. Obviously, they have their own specifications and they have their own needs, so you want to make sure that you have a good partnership with them as well to tell you that you've done what you needed to do correctly.
So Mark, for a landing, what do you expect to see?
Yeah, so from the other side, I think they got all the right folks. There's only one person that we like to see as well, and that's usually like the business development or VP of sales or somebody like that to be involved. Need them to be involved because you have so much partner interaction. So, I mean, if you're a CMO, you're working with the Pfizers, the Tevas, you name them, or even smaller organizations. But you need to have that hand-holding between the two organizations, between your partners and yourselves. It's critical. So
I have a question. One of the things I've always puzzled about is who owns it in the end. Okay. Is it a legit question? In the end, who owns it?
Who stands up and
Yeah.
says this is my solution?
And this is how I fix it, and this is how I maintain it. Yeah. So is that a legit question? I mean,
No, it's a very legitimate question. And if you look at it from pharma company to pharma company, there's an owner in every one that's different. For example, some like supply chain, right? Because they're closest to the product. They're responsible to make sure it gets out to the actual patient. But then we have the folks like in BT, our business technology group, that it's a very intensive infrastructure on collecting the data, sending the data, master data, who collects all that. So we have owners across the company. So at the end of the day, within Pfizer for ourselves, speaking, the direct owner is a group of folks that manage this from department to department, because each have a unique piece of the puzzle, and then it's brought all together through a governance structure, and that's how we operate.
okay. So Ashley, on your side, I mean, if I asked you who owns it,
I think that's a great question.
Thank God. Yeah. Okay, go ahead.
I do know that we have some folks who are actually in PBOA who've actually been working with them.
I'm sorry.
They're in PBOA,
Okay.
Trying to discuss this exact topic. I know that it is something that's still out there that people are trying to understand, as you said, who's owning what. As a CMO, obviously we don't move forward and do anything unless we talk to the client and understand their needs and kind of do risk assessments and talk and make sure that we're all on the same page before we would do anything. So So I don't know if that really answers your question.
No, it answers
but-
it actually brings up 4 more, but
Oh,
okay.
fantastic.
All right, so,
I'm glad I could help.
so, oh, no, I mean, this is important. So, Mark,
Yeah.
you know, like, so in the end, you do all this work, I mean, who's your point contact? Is it a group of people? Is it,
Yeah, and actually we've noticed that it changes along the way in many cases, depending on the organization and the size of the organization. They don't always have the infrastructure that they need to be able to support this type of an effort. So what we find that it often changes hands, but we also find in the end, especially with the smaller organizations, well, not even smaller, mid to small, that the ultimate decision maker is the president of the organization.
okay.
Yeah, and they're signing on the dotted line.
So does it sit in a quality organization? Where does it sit?
Oh,
Yeah.
Yeah. So for that, I think that there has to be a marriage. As Ashley was saying, you have to have a marriage between your folks on the floor, your quality group, and your IT organizations. They have to work in a team, as a team, and come together with a final decision that they present.
Okay, yeah, I get it now.
Yeah.
The reason I asked the question, when we merged with, back 100 years ago, anyway, Ciba-Geigy merged with Sandoz, one of our criteria was, well, who goes to jail, Russ? What that really meant. So the answer is, who answers the hard questions?
Right.
I guess that's what I'm saying.
No, that's
All right.
exactly right. I mean, back in the IT days, right, you never got fired for, using Cisco, right? So, it's the same philosophy here. You have to make sure that your partner is
Right.
the one that you can put your faith in.
Wow.
I think the other thing to understand too is that serialization is no different than just it's coding requirements on steroids. So think of it, we code product today and we send product out. Who's responsible for the product quality? The people that actually produce the product, and quality to make sure that it's checked out, everything's okay, and then it goes out. None of these things change. All we're doing is adding complexity to do 2 more levels of 2 more levels of coding, and we're adding the data component.
Yep.
So again, what's happening is quality is now starting to understand they're absorbing the data component just for serialization. They have the data component for product quality to begin with. It's just another adder. So that's why maybe we don't answer the question directly, but I don't think there's anybody that can stand up and say we own it, because
Okay.
if you look at it, many departments really, and this is true in any industry, are all come together to make that product quality.
Okay, I mean, I just want to make sure that everybody's clear on that one.
Yeah, I know we're talking about serialization itself, but don't forget that when this all goes electronic, you also have the T3s that are going with it. And so now, as of 11/17, you're marrying those 2 documents. They'll be separate for now, but you're going to be sending a T3 with all its information, and then you're going to be sending the EPSIS information to those brands as well.
I got it. So Ashley, from my standpoint, the person with the hardest job, at least, there's Mark, that's Pfizer. How do you do this? When you're onboarding a client, I mean, how do you manage the whole thing? Just in generality, specifics, it just seems to me that that's a pretty big hurdle for you. I mean, how do you manage onboarding clients? I mean, just getting them to go, what is it that you tell them? What do you do? Where's it go?
Well, I do know from certain experiences that we've had over the last year trying to work on this. It's been interesting. So with a lot of the clients that we work with, they are bigger. They're Pfizer's. They're other people. They have huge departments. They have teams dedicated to understanding what they need on their products, and they've looked at their product line across all aspects. And so when we worked with them, it was a little bit easier for us to implement what worked for them. So they had their requirements, they had the understanding of the thing that they wanted to see on their package. So it made our job a little bit easier as far as getting the software and the data managing and how they want this presented, the files at the end of the day. But if we were working with someone who maybe had a little bit of a smaller outfit or a smaller organization, they may look to us and say, oh, well, you guys are the subject matter experts. So what do you think? Or how have you done this traditionally? And, that's something that has been, speaking to your challenges question earlier, was something to, how do we figure out how to make the system work for multiple people who may or may not know exactly what they want? So that's definitely something we've been trying to work through even to this day. So.
Mark?
Yeah, I think speaking on behalf of the CMOs out there, I mean, they're in a challenging spot. Right?
Yeah.
They're always being told by their brands, their partners, what they're going to put on a box, how they're going to package everything. And it's no different now with serialization. They're going to be told, you folks are going to be told how you're going to connect to them, how you're going, how, where, and when you're going to be sending that data. etc. So it's a typical situation for a CMO where everything is still downhill. Everything's running downhill from the brand. And not all the brands have done a great job helping out those CMOs. I work with them every day, and more times they're like, well, we send out the questionnaire, but we didn't get anything back. We send out the questionnaire, we didn't get anything back. And that just also goes to show my first comment, that everybody's just a little bit slow to adoption for a full adoption. And because of that, it's affecting the whole line, because a brand that you're working with, if they haven't made a decision, then it's almost impossible for the CMO to know what they want, or how they're going to connect.
All right, let me ask this question, and I'll open it up. It's really focused on the small CMO interface, but don't take offense there, man. So, what advice would you give a small company? In other words, like the aspect GS1 specifications. You know what I'm saying? You got people out there that you're going to be, in your case, actually, as Mark says, they're going to be clueless, or more importantly, they need guidance. So, what are your advice? You know, I mean, you got large companies, like you said, they're four deep to give you. But what else? I mean, in that case, if you're not dealing with that, what advice do you give them?
I think there are a few different avenues that you could explore to try to familiarize yourself with what's required. So I know, as I said earlier, being involved in organizations like PBOA or some other organizations out there that you could network or have contacts with to help you understand or clarify anything that's ambiguous. Something else that may help if you are starting from scratch and you're working on the design phase and you're trying to evaluate what vendor you may want to go to as far as buying equipment and getting software, that partnership that we talked about, getting somebody who does have some knowledge, has a lot of expertise and has really good project management, because they may be able to provide you at least the minimum of what the requirements are, and then you can work with, at least in our case, the client, and try to help them understand exactly what they need, and then the marriage of the two should eventually get you to where you want to be. And then obviously there's always consulting. If there's people out there that you want to talk with that could come in and kind of help you set up your system the way that works best for you, because as we stated multiple times, there's not one, all-in-one package that's applicable to everybody's situation.
Okay. So Mark, as a brand owner, I mean, what advice would you give them when they're going on third-party serialization? What advice would you give folks?
Look to understand flexibility, right? So and to Ashley's point, we can provide some additional data to help on understanding the mandates and understanding what we need. It's not just about, here's my set of requirements and this is what you produce for me. I would recommend that you ask the questions back and turn it back around and say, how can you help me get a little bit more involved with what do you know about this mandate? Take the opportunity to really tap into the knowledge base that you have when people come to you and ask for specific things. Also, make sure that your infrastructure is flexible. In other words, we refer to it as a black box because we have a lot of contract manufacturers we work with. So that means we have to have a portal that's easily to get in and out of with data transfer. That's extremely important from a contract manufacturer who is out there doing business for others, that your systems are ultra flexible so that you can do that, but not too flexible where it kills you from a financial perspective. So there's a fine balance that you have to work through too. But I do believe if you pick a global solution and stick with it, then you'll see that a lot of people will model to it. And then the real complexity comes in is holding back those folks that are asking for much more than what the actual requirement is, and then working with them to hone them down to stick to that core solution. Because we all know once people go off grid with what's really needed, it just gets more expensive for everybody.
So let me ask you this question. Just back to the reason I find is it's a balancing act here. I mean, the CMO versus the larger brand company. So how were you able to decide to, for example, there's a build acquisition component, right? So my question is, how are you able to decide on what to design and build to assure the flexibility and meet your client needs? You mean that, to me, you're in the worst spot. You're in a tough spot. So how do you do that? How do you balance? I got to get this stuff. I got to make it available to my clients. Oh, and by the way, I got to satisfy, half a dozen different functions. What's the first step, Ashley?
Again, I think kind of doing your research and working with somebody who can supply you a solution that's going to allow you to manipulate it in the ways that are important. So from our standpoint, we have different cartons that may be of varying different sizes. So we want to incorporate that for something that may be unknown. So obviously it's something simple that, as Mark spoke to earlier, people are familiar with lines, so the technology as far as manipulating a conveyor and making certain packages fit a certain way is pretty understood. I would say that we actually incorporate a lot of a manual system, so we do have some automation, and currently the way that we've done a lot of things is manually packaged. So we're able to know from a standpoint what's best for us is to try to get some type of system that would allow us to do a little bit of automation, but still keep that core manual packaging that would then allow us to keep the flexibility and keep our batch records and keep familiarity with training and SOPs and all that stuff pretty similar, so that way we could phase it in and it wouldn't be as scary to anyone in the organization. There's some familiarity there.
So those are the characteristics when you did your research you were looking for? Or?
Yeah, absolutely. The vendor that we ended up working with was also really great because they were able to, again, listen as we talked about what we needed, but they were able to offer us a lot of the different parts of it. So not only the equipment, but vision systems, and then the aggregation portion was something that we decided to go ahead and move forward with, even though it's not necessarily a requirement by fall, but it just kind of made it easier that they were able to provide all the different moving pieces. And then the project management from that standpoint helped us then build the software and then allow us to have the different flexible parameters that we would need to accommodate different clients. So the code and the rigid template could kind of be there, but you would understand enough about it to be able to manipulate it to do the projects that you don't know that are coming later on down the road.
I gotcha. So Mark, yeah. I knew this was going to happen. Anyway, so do you find people coming to you and say, I got to do serialization, and so Ashley did her homework, but I got to believe that that's a one-off perhaps? I mean, what has been your experience on that? You got to guide them through this? Go ahead, give us some.
Yeah, so we take over after the L2 or L3, depending on how it is. There's a lot of good information out there for L4 and L5 decisions. There's a lot of bad information out there for L4 and 5 decisions. One of the things that we do recognize with the CMO is because they have all of the specifications being dictated to them by a brand as to how they're going to connect, that there's less and less flexibility on the solutions that they can actually look at. So it's it's a fine line there as to how we're going to consult with them so that they're making the right decision.
I got you.
Because to be quite frank, we have a different solution than everybody else out there.
Okay.
Our solution is a cloud-based solution, et cetera. It's just different. So
Yeah, I think, but I guess the
trying
point.
to be general.
Yeah, but I think what we need, we could be general but understand, folks want to, there's a lot of people listening, or there's going to be people looking at. You got to give them the options that they need to look at. For example, let's step back and say, okay, what does a serialization deployment home run look like? Mark. Too much of a question, huh?
Yeah, that's a big question. So
Right.
from our perspective, a home run for us is that we have a solution that can be used under multiple platforms for multiple mandates. Ultimately, for us, it's all about achieving the mandate within the mandate compliance deadline and being successful so that we don't have a one-off type solution, that this solution can be applied across the board.
Okay.
Also, obviously, there's a bunch of other factors that go into a successful deployment. We talk about cost, we talk about safety, those kind of things, and we talk about less around waste. Because remember, when you're switching over to serialization, you have to take your initial packaging components that you have, and you have to fade those out. If you don't plan appropriately, then you lose all of those components. And we know for those that deal in that space, it's extremely expensive. So it's very important to align schedules. So that's why it's a very difficult question to ask, but I would say personally, strong collaboration and achieving the deadline is what we really look at for a successful deployment.
So you're not off the hook, Ashley. What's the home run look like?
I would concur with Mark.
It's a nice answer. Evasive, but nice. I like that.
That's good.
All right, Mark.
A home run for an organization is to be able to make sure, for our standpoint, they've done all this work from the line, all the packaging, all the lines, understanding the rules, the regulations, and everything else. Where people fall down is that connection, that person-to-person connection, business-to-business connection, from their organization to their brand. And a perfect home run for folks is that they can actually implement that, and those connections and the information being transferred back and forth is completely seamless. Organizations like CMOs, like I said before, their IT staffs are very small. For them to have to sit back and babysit 10, 20, 30 connections at a time, almost impossible for them to do.
It must consume a lot of time. I mean, what has been your experience?
To make those connections?
Yeah, to make that, I mean, babysit it. It sounds.
The babysitting would be definitely a lot of time, because this is an ever-changing market, right? We have changes going. This is the first phase of this whole process in America is starting this fall.
Right.
But we have until 2023 until it's fully implemented. And then you have EU coming on in 2018. You've got Russia coming on board. You've got China already involved. You've got Brazil, who's changing the standards, et cetera. So this is a changing environment. And you really need to pick a solution that is going to allow you to change with it and also allow you to grow in it. This for a CMO should not be a loss center. This should be a profit center for the CMO. And for them to, for CMOs not to look at it that way, I think is doing a detriment to their own organization.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Yep, thank you.